Yukihira流真夏のクリスマスケーキっす。花火玉!
Today we're making Yukihira's Yule Log, which is supposed to be a summertime dish, but I mean, it's Yule Log. You have to have it for Christmas. Yule, go crazy. I'm just gonna start. We're in it for the long haul, guys. Grab yourself 2 bowls for this. You're gonna need 2 so that way we can separate some eggs. First, we're gonna separate our egg whites into 1 bowl, which can be your smaller bowl, followed by your egg yolks into that other bowl. What are you doing? Put the eggshell down and then get the bowl. Now continue to separate all of your egg whites and your egg yolks, making sure that none of the egg yolk falls into the egg white, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Now gently break up the egg yolks with the power mixer before turning it on, otherwise it may splatter everywhere, or you can use a hand mixer with paddle attachments, which I don't have. Now normally you would add sugar at this point to start creaming your egg yolks in sugar, but since you didn't use sugar, we are incorporating 150 grams worth of rice syrup. The rice syrup doesn't really cream the egg yolks with itself like sugar normally would, so it's going to be very difficult to get this to a ribbon stage, which is normally what you would look for when you're doing cake like this. I ended up mixing mine for a solid 4 or 5 minutes just to kind of get it to this nicer texture. Alternatively, just use granulated sugar. Now to this, I am going to slowly begin adding 100 grams worth of all-purpose flour. You want to do this slowly to start incorporating it into the egg yolks, and since I'm not using a paddle attachment, this ends up becoming a mess, but you gotta do what you gotta do. After a few minutes, I am able to get this to cream nicely and incorporate all of that all-purpose flour into the eggs and to that rice syrup. This ends up being a really nice consistency, and I was actually pretty surprised by it. And since there's also no butter in this recipe, I am going to add a bit of oil. We are adding a total of 30 milliliters worth of blended oil into this mix. Once you have your oil fully mixed in, add 1 capful of vanilla for that good. And once the vanilla is fully incorporated, hit this with just a pinch of salt. We're not looking for too much, only about 2 grams worth of salt. Next up is 1 teaspoon or about 2 grams worth of baking powder straight into this mixture. Really, Paul? What is happening? Just get this done, really? And once you've fully mixed in all of your dry goods, this batter should be good to go, but there is one secret ingredient, and that's going to be the mountain yam or the yagaimo. Now we have used this on the channel before, and it is somewhat tricky to use, but what you really want to do is only peel off the portion you're going to use directly. Once you've peeled off a couple of inches worth of that peel, grate this over a bowl, making sure that you do this over a bowl or a plate, because look at this mess. Yup. Once you have 70 grams of your gaimo grated, add the 70 grams directly to your batter and just watch at what happens to this batter. You saw how nice and ribboned this batter was before, and as soon as I add in that yagaimo, you can see the elasticity that it adds to this batter. I was actually kind of worried at this point because I haven't worked with a batter that uses yagaimo before, and it kind of made it super plasticky and elastic, but we're gonna roll with it. Now we do also have to make our meringue, but this is not a traditional meringue because there is no sugar used in this. So I ended up whisking this by hand just to start breaking down the egg whites before I used the power mixer, so that way I didn't get a mess all over the place. Once I had broken down the egg whites, I started to mix my meringue into a nice stiff peak, trying to make sure I don't over whisk the egg whites. If you over whisk the egg whites for a cake like this, it will break and it has a very high chance of deflating. Once you have the egg whites mixed and your other batter ready to go, grab yourself a 17 by 12 sheet tray. Line this with some parchment paper, making sure there is a bit of pan spray on the bottom so that way it sticks to it. And once you have your sheet tray lined with parchment paper, hit this with just a touch more pan spray onto the bottom portion, not on the sides. Now we do have to fold in the egg whites very carefully, so we are only going to fold in a third at a time. The first third really doesn't matter too much. You still want to be gentle with it, but you're using the first third of that egg white to really start to break down that initial batter since it is so thick from that yagaimo. Once you have that first third in, add the second third of your egg white mixture. I had to try to cut this in a way rather than fold it because that batter was so thick. What you're really looking to do when you add the final bit of egg white is you're trying to make sure that you don't see any egg white in that batter any longer. And this really does apply for any kind of cake that you make this way. When you are incorporating egg white into your batter, the overall goal is to mix this very gently until you no longer see streaks of egg white. After mixing the egg white into my second batter, this actually came out really nice, and I was actually very surprised at how this kind of came together. Now once you have your batter ready to go, drop this into the center of your sheet tray so that way it has some room to spread out. Once once you have it all in the center, you're going to gently bring this to the sides. Now, again, this has a very difficult time stretching because of that yagaimo, but just take some time with it and make sure you don't overly press into this so you don't deflate it too much. Give this a few tamp downs just to release any air bubbles, and once you've done that, this is ready to go into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 minutes. This cooks very quickly, so make sure you keep an eye on it. After 10 minutes, I did check my cake, giving it a pat and a poke, and it was ready after 10 minutes, so your mileage will vary. Now, once it is pulled out of the oven, you want to remove this from the sheet tray immediately so it doesn't continue to cook. This is super important, otherwise your cake will dry out. Once you've removed it from the sheet tray, release it from the parchment paper. This way you'll have a better chance of rolling this guy up. Now, I firmly believe in pre-rolling your Yule logs, so that's what we're going to get ready to do. Dust this with just a touch of cocoa powder so that way it doesn't fully stick to itself. Now, orient the cake to where the shorter end is facing towards you and gently begin rolling this guy up. And once you have it rolled up, let it hang out until it's completely cool. Now we get to make some weirdo sauces. For this, you're going to need 2 bananas and 1 whole avocado directly into a food processor. To this, we are going to add 450 grams worth of silken tofu into this as well, and you want the silken tofu so that way it blends up. Now process this until it is completely mush and completely sauced up. This is really wet though, so I was actually kind of concerned when we were making this. I didn't add too much of the soy milk even though they mentioned they used it, so we're only adding 15 milliliters worth of soy milk out of principle just to say it's in there. Now after you do your little happy dance and you get everything blended, we want to remove half of this portion. The reason for this is because half of it will be the rice version and the other half will be the cocoa version. Now for the rice version, I am taking 50 grams worth of puffed rice and adding this to the first batch of my sauce. Now I said sauce, but it really should be a frosting, but you can see how wet this is, so there is cause for concern here. Now once you have all of your rice into that first batch, remove this into a second bowl that's a bit bigger because the first bowl obviously wasn't doing it for you. And as you begin to mix this up and realize it looks like baby food that came up twice, you have your first batch of sauce that needs to hang out before we blend it so that way it absorbs all of that rice in there. Now the second half is going to get cocoa powder to make our chocolate sauce. I'm adding in 50 grams worth of cocoa powder directly to this blender and making sure it fully incorporates, which it doesn't because I hate this blender and I do need to throw this out. Please guys, remind me in the comments, Paul, please buy a Vitamixer so that way you can actually make good sauces. Now this needed an additional 10 grams worth of cocoa powder so that way it was a bit more robust in its chocolate flavor. So after you get everything blended up, but not really, and continue to scrape down the sides because the blender doesn't really work very well, you will have some kind of a chocolate sauce. Now this one did not set up very well and it didn't taste very sweet, so I added in 10 grams worth of rice syrup into this. We are trying to go with that rice syrup theme, but if you don't have it, feel free to use agave or sugar or honey or whatever you really want. Now once you have that rice syrup into that mixture, give this a quick spooning just so that way it's fully incorporated, and you can see that this doesn't really set up. So we're going to throw this in the fridge and hopefully the cold helps bring it back down to temperature. Now after washing your mixer and remembering to put the blade into the blender, add that second batch directly into your blender so that way we can start to puree this. Now kick this thing on and let it puree until it's completely smooth. I am adding an additional 10 grams worth of rice syrup to this as well to bring up that sweetness. Continue to blend this until all of that is fully incorporated, and you can see that that rice is still pretty thick. So to thin it out, I am going to use 80 milliliters worth of soy milk, and we're going to use some xanthan gum to bring this up to speed. I am using 2 grams worth of xanthan gum just to get it started, and this is going to help thicken the sauce. Xanthan gum is a thickener you can use in lieu of gelatin or agar, so that way you'll actually be able to spread this thing in your cake, because that's going to be the overall goal with this vanilla rice sauce thing that he made. Now remove this from the blender, placing it into your bowl of choice so this way it cools down completely before we decide to use it. You can see how thick this is now thanks to the xanthan gum, and to be honest, I do like using xanthan gums to make ice creams and things like that, so it does do a lot of work for me when I do these things. Now throw your lid on it and place this in the fridge until we're ready to start rolling this. Okay, next we have to make the quote-unquote coffee crumble, which isn't a coffee crumble. This is absolutely not a coffee crumble. First, we're going to take 1 banana and small dice this into very thin pieces. I'm not sure if he had mashed it or pureed it or whatever the case is, bananas, but I wanted to have some chunks of banana in there. So after slicing this, place this into your bowl, and we are also going to add in 1/2 of a grated apple. Stop eating the apples, Paul, we need those. I'm using a nice Fuji apple for this, but feel free to use any apple you really want. Grate this into a bowl directly over your bananas, and remember, we're only using about half of the apple, and this came out to around 85 to 90 grams worth of grated apple. Make sure you get everything off of that grater so nothing is left in there, and please use a guard if you don't feel safe doing this and you won't lose any knuckles. Now this other apple is going to just be a snack. We're just going to eat this because it was really, really good. Now to this quote-unquote coffee crumble, we are adding around 30 milliliters worth of blended oil to it since there is no butter. We're also adding 30 grams worth of chopped walnuts, 30 grams worth of chopped almonds. Give this a good spooning, and then we are going to add in 30 grams worth of rice syrup. To this mixture, I am adding 100 grams worth of all-purpose flour into 2 batches. Now you want to make sure you do mix this thoroughly so none of that raw flour is not incorporated into your mixture, but honestly, this isn't going to be a crumble. A crumble is butter, sugar, and flour. I tried to add in just a touch more oil to loosen this thing back up so that way I can actually put this onto a sheet tray. Now we are adding in 10 grams worth of ground coffee to this. Alternatively, use like a shot of espresso or some of your leftover morning coffee at this point, because honestly, nothing is going to save this, and I'm telling you this knowing what it tastes like. Grab yourself a small sheet tray lined with parchment paper and place all of this mixture onto that parchment paper. Traditionally, again, crumble is just 3 ingredients, sugar, butter, and flour, that you pulse to make it into crumble, and you place the crumble on top of whatever you're baking. Now take this mixture and place it into the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes until it is mostly cooked. This is still going to be super wet because of all the moisture from the fruit, but it doesn't taste horrible even though it looks pretty terrible. And my first thought was to try to do the biscotti method where you basically bake this twice. So to bake that twice after letting it cool for 10 minutes, I'm just slicing this into smaller 1-inch size pieces. So this way I can place this back into the oven. It kind of looks like a really bad granola bar at this point, but we're gonna roll with it. Now place these back onto your sheet tray, making sure there is some room in between each one to bake, and place this in the oven at 425 Fahrenheit until they're dry. Now we get to work on these white chocolate mandarin, but don't you do it. Don't you juggle in the kitchen again. Now we're going to work on these white chocolate mandarin firecrackers that he had made. Now I am zesting 3 of these guys, but if you don't have these mandarins available, feel free to just zest 1 large orange and you're going to be fine. After zesting them, make sure you place that zest onto a paper towel so this way we can slightly dry these out. This will really help incorporate into the chocolate later, and I really like doing this if I am trying to dust this onto anything. Now the chocolate is regular white melting chocolate that I had in the microwave for about 30 seconds. I had to pulse this again for 30 seconds to get it fully melted, but this chocolate is pre-tempered, so it just makes your life really easy when you're working with projects. Now this half sphere mold is actually my spherification mold that I've used in past projects, so if you want to check one out, the link is down below. After adding a small touch of your white chocolate into the mold, make sure you do spread this out to where it's somewhat of a thin layer. You don't want these layers to be too thick because we are going to add a second layer later. I ended up using around half of my chocolate that I had melted, giving me around 6 half molds, which in total will eventually be 3 full chocolate bombs. Now, once you have your chocolate nicely laid out, grab your mandarin zest that is now not quite dry and begin to place it onto that white chocolate in the messiest way possible. Like, Paul, you didn't even attempt to get this into the white chocolate. You tried to sprinkle it on there like it would be really cool looking, but it wasn't dry enough to do that. So now you're sitting here cleaning up your mess trying to get this. I'm done with you. Now place this into the freezer for 20 minutes before you decide to work with it. After those 20 minutes, we are going to apply a second layer of white chocolate to help fill in any gaps from the previous layer. This is also going to help harden the shell quite a bit and give you a nice layer to work with when we inject this with chocolate later. Pop this into the freezer until we're ready for it. Next, we're actually going to frost the inside of our cake. The reason for this is because I want this to set up quite a bit before we decide to work with it later. So unroll your cake, and what you'll notice is that if this is done properly, the cake will want to roll back on its own for the most part. This will allow you to have a really nicely rolled Yule log in the end. And surprisingly, there's no cracks in it, and I was really happy with how the cake came out. Now we're going to fill this with the toasted rice frosting thing first, and as you can see, it did oxidize just a bit because it was bananas and avocados. I mean, it was going to turn brown no matter what, since there was no acidic content in this. The goal is to try to fill this to where you have an even layer of both frosting and cake. I feel like I could have used just a touch more frosting in the center to get a better layer, but it ended up being pretty close to what I would normally do for a Yule log. Make sure that this is evenly spread, and you don't have to bring it all the way to the edges because we will trim that later. Once you have this evenly spread out all over your cake, we want to begin rolling this back up immediately to bring it back into that Yule log shape. Be gentle with this and be careful with this so you don't crack your cake, taking your time to make sure you also don't press hard into this. If you press too hard, you're going to have that frosting just come out the sides, and it just defeats the purpose of all the work we just put in. Once you have this rolled up, place this somewhat seam side down if you can. I couldn't quite get it seam side down, but it was going to be fine. And then roll this back up in your parchment paper to hold its shape. You can use plastic wrap if you have it, but I had my parchment laying around, so I just used that instead. Now admire the inside of your cake and realize that when you rolled this thing up, you were supposed to put in the chocolate frosting as well. There's no way to unroll this, so we're just gonna, it's fine. Now after letting it rest for around an hour with the filling, we can trim off the ends of our cake to reveal the center of our Yule log, which does look really pretty other than the brown oxidized nonsense on the inside. Alternatively, you can trim off the ends after you frost it with the chocolate frosting, so that way it just removes some of that chocolate frosting, but you can see the inside does look really solid. But we have another problem, that our chocolate frosting never actually set up to be somewhat like a buttercream. I actually did test this, and I placed some of that chocolate onto a piece of that cake, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but after holding it, I was able to see this slide just a bit. So to thicken this up, we are going to use secret ingredient Chemical X xanthan gum, and I guess it really is Chemical X, isn't it? Because it's xanthan gum. Now place this into your blender, making sure you puree it and scrape the sides down because the blender is absolute garbage. And I ended up adding in another gram worth of xanthan gum just to make sure that this was thick enough. After pureeing this for an additional few minutes, you should have all of that xanthan gum activated and air incorporated, and now you're able to actually spread out this chocolate frosting. This is closer to the consistency I'm comfortable working with, but we're still gonna pop this into the fridge to let it hang out until we're really ready to start frosting. But we also need another tool.
No!
What?
Those are mine!
I bought them.
For me!
No.
You turd!
Apparently anything in the house that's labeled soy milk belongs to the wife, but that's okay. We needed that ice cream stick. And after letting your cake rest for around an hour, remove 2 to 3 inches off of the end of it, so this way you can have that secondary piece of your Yule log to rest right on top. This is what your Yule log will start to look like before we put it together. Now grab all of your goopy, chocolatey... What are you doing? We can't even see what you're doing over there. Rotate the cutting board, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, once you have this chocolate on there, begin to spread this into as nicely even of a layer as you can. This is going to be difficult because it doesn't feel like frosting. There's no way around it. This doesn't hold up like buttercream, but I tried my best to make sure that this had an even layer of this chocolate, avocado, banana, tofu, soy milk, buttercream. It sounds so wrong to say. After spending some time on this, I was able to get most of that chocolate frosting onto it, and it looks like a giant poop log now, which is pretty fitting, but we still need to use the secret tool to hopefully get some nice layers. So break your ice cream stick in half, making sure that you don't have too many wood splinters on it, and get ready to try to salvage the way this Yule log cake actually looks. Now, with your health violation in hand, begin making those beautiful bark marks onto your cake. You want to do this very slowly, very methodically, and very carefully because that frosting will come off as you decide to scrape all of this, so just make sure you have a towel on hand or something to really wipe this with. But after some effort and some time, we have some bark marks on our Yule log cake, and to be honest, it doesn't look half bad, and I'm kind of happy with it. And now we have to finish our white chocolate bombs, and this is the biscotti kind of cracker crumble thing that we had made that isn't a crumble, that isn't a biscotti, it's just dried out fruit cake bread things. After cutting these up into smaller pieces, remove the white chocolate shells from your mold out of the freezer, and you can see that these came out pretty well, and I was actually really happy with how these came out. Now, after removing all of your white chocolate halves from their molds, set them aside, and we need to fill each and every one of these after lining them up. I like to do this so it makes the process... What are you doing? Just line them up. I like to do this so that way I can just go down the line and fill them. Place a small amount of crumble in every other one so that way you actually can cap each and every one off. And after reheating some of your leftover white chocolate, we are going to use this as glue to seal both of these halves together. I was able to somewhat get this glued together, but I ended up having to add some more on there. But you can actually hear the crumble. Now, once you seal this off, it doesn't look that great, and I'm not a pastry chef, and I fully admit it, but after a while, we have our 3 firecracker bombs. Now, to get the chocolate on the inside, grab yourself a metal skewer and heat it up over your stove. This is going to allow you to puncture the white chocolate balls, so that way you have room to use your injector later. Make sure you do this with each and every single ball that you created, so that way you have that hole ready to go, so when you go to fill it, you're not worried about trying to make a new hole, reheating your skewer, or anything like that. Now, we are using that leftover frosting to fill these guys up, but since it was a touch thick, I ended up using 30 milliliters worth of soy milk to thin it back out, so that way we could actually inject these without them being too thick. I also added 15 milliliters worth of rice syrup to sweeten it up just a touch more, because it was kind of, Lucian, what are you doing on the counter? You don't belong here. Now, the string for the firecracker is going to be vanilla bean, but this is super expensive, so if you don't want to spend the money, just don't. Oh, and Rachel said, Paul, wear your apron because you're going to make a mess for yourself. Now, split the vanilla bean in half, and we are only using a third of this. Once you split it in half, scrape all of the vanilla beans out of the inside and use the pod to scrape that directly into your mixture. Once you have both vanilla beans scraped and added to your mixture, give this a good spooning to fully incorporate all of that vanilla bean. And unfortunately, I feel like this was a waste of vanilla bean, but don't tell anyone. Now grab yourself a turkey injector or a meat injector and fill it up with all of your chocolate. Inject this directly into your chocolate bombs so that way they fill up completely. This took some time because there was some air involved and I had to make sure that I constantly added in more chocolate to make sure they were really full. Clean up the top of them so that way there isn't too much chocolate hanging out, and that's all you really need to do to get these things locked and loaded. These are kind of a mess, but I feel like they looked really cool, so it was kind of worth it. Now take half of your vanilla bean slice and place this into the top of 2 of them because we didn't want to use more vanilla bean, and place the other one into the fridge. Now grab your cake out of the fridge and place your 2 white chocolate bombs really nicely onto your Yule log, and there is the beginnings of the end. Now we are going to also garnish this with some mint because I believe he had something green on there, but I couldn't really tell what it was, so I went with mint, you know, because chocolate and mint. Now place the leaves really wherever you want, making sure that you don't use too many of them to take away from the actual cake, but I think it looked nice having them kind of stem off of the chocolate bomb, a few directly on the cutting board, so that way it looked like it was growing out of the Yule log. Do whatever you want, and there it is, Yukihira's Yule Log summertime cake from Food Wars that we're making in December, and I don't think you should make this. There it is, guys. Yukihira's summertime Christmas Yule Log cake. This thing was quite a task to put together, and I will say it looks gorgeous. Like, look at the roll. Even though we missed some of the chocolate in the center, I think some of the cocoa powder makes up for it, so you have that transitional layer in the middle, and you kind of see the vanilla cake as well as some of the other filling, so it works out well, but you know, put some chocolate in there. Just don't be like me. There's only one thing left to do, and that's to give this a taste test, and I'm not excited. For the piece that I'm about to eat, I'm gonna cut right about there so that way I can take that little mandarin white chocolate bomb with me. Look at that slice though. It's a nice looking piece. It's a nice looking piece of cake. We're gonna dig into the cake first without the mandarin kind of chocolate coffee crumble bomb first, just like the judges did. We'll see what it tastes like. The cake is really soft though, so that's nice. It has a lot of moisture in it, which is really nice. Trying to get all the flavors in there, so cheers. I don't hate it, but I also don't really like it. The texture is a little strange to me because of those frostings. Like, it's not buttercream. It doesn't have that richness to it, which I know is what he was going for. It doesn't feel bad eating it, if that makes sense. Like, it's not very heavy at all. Okay, it kind of grows on you. All right, let's try it with the chocolate bomb. Let's try it with the chocolate bomb. There's no way. There's no way to do, like, it doesn't explode. No explosions except for clothing happening. This is inappropriate, okay. Now, my first thought is to like try to, but that chocolate is pretty solid, so. There we go. Okay, now you get all that good on there. You can see how wet the chocolate that was on top was from the stuff that we had thinned out. The crumble kind of incorporated itself into that chocolate, but it's still very much there. It's kind of hard to see because you can see all the crumble. Let's try this with everything. Now let's see if we can get some white chocolate. We'll get the white chocolate, crumble, the cake, the filling. It looks like, this looks like vomit. The mandarin made it twice as good as it was before. That little pop of citrus actually helps this so much. But unfortunately, the coffee doesn't come through. It kind of gets overwhelmed by everything else, so the flavors have to be very delicate, so that way they kind of play off of each other. In my opinion, just make regular Yule Log. I'm gonna give this like a 6 out of 10 because of how much effort is involved to make this. And I will say, I'd rather just have regular Yule Log cake, maybe with some orange in there, you know, chocolate orange thrown in there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, whether or not you would try to make something like this, whether or not it's worth the effort, and whether or not you just want some good old chocolate Yule Log. Make sure to join the Shokugeki battle in the links down below where you have a chance to win one of those brand new knives, pick up a brand new t-shirt. My name is Chefpk, get subscribed, and remember, keep playing with your food. This is a little over the top with playing with your food. I don't think I'm gonna walk through here, but I'm not actually gonna finish this.